B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins with news and comment. It's Wednesday, January 4th, 2017. This is part one of my two-part podcast postings for today. And in response to some listener suggestions, I'm going to put part one and part two in this podcast, and then part two will show up as a separate podcast. We'll see if that works for you. The idea is that some people like to listen to a full half hour and some people simply don't have the time. And I'm trying to balance the demands of these two types of listeners. So for those of you who want a full half hour, you'll get parts 1 and 2 in this podcast. And if you don't have time to complete it, you can come back to this one, or you can just download part 2 and start listening there. Again, this is an experiment, a work in progress. I appreciate your feedback, so send me your comments, peter@peterbcollins.com. So today, President Barack Obama made his final trip to Capitol Hill before his last trip, which will be on January 20th, where he is really going to be just a spectator. And today he was exhorting Democrats to fight for his signature achievement as president. At least that's how he views it. It's called the Affordable Care Act, or better known as Obamacare. And we know that Trump and the Republicans are planning to repeal it forthwith. And so Obama is fighting. And I respect that. But I have doubts about the ability of Democrats to do anything to forestall what appears to be the inevitable repeal. Now, Democrats have important claims here. The president, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi have all said, well, it's the height of irresponsibility to repeal this law and remove insurance coverage from over 20 million Americans without having a plan B ready to go. And that is a fair comment. But the Republicans are so rabid about this, and they show that 42% of Americans don't approve of Obamacare. Now, that's not a majority. And that 42% is unlikely to include many people who actually are covered by Obamacare. So it is one group of people denying benefits to a separate group of people. And there are inevitably class issues, economic power, and some racial bias involved in those positions. But as I view it here today, with just 16 days remaining before the Republicans have complete control of our government, repeal is inevitable. And I think the Democrats better have a plan C for how to take this on. Now, the rhetoric is good. There's a new slogan that Trump's idea is to make America sick again. Or if Alan Grayson were still in Washington, he'd say make Americans die again, because that is the Republican health care plan, such as it is. They believe that their constituents can buy their way out of any health care crisis or health emergency. But we know that bankruptcies are most often caused by unexpected health care costs. And so this is a very ugly battle that is shaping up. And as you know, I am both a beneficiary of Obamacare. I'm heading into, I think, my 4th year of coverage. And I am a sharp critic of the quality of that care. I pay high prices for shitty coverage. And because I'm now in an HMO, I use Kaiser, I have more predictable coverage and care. And it's acceptable to me. I'm not, raving about it. But in the first year, when I used a for-profit insurance carrier, Anthem Blue Cross, I was consigned to second-tier coverage. I was out of network on everything that I needed to do. I couldn't find a dermatologist within 50 miles who would take my lousy insurance. And the rates jumped in double digits each year. So the Affordable Care Act is not affordable. It's not sustainable. Single payer is the route that we need to head toward, but of course the Republicans won't permit that. So we're over a barrel. And my concern is that the Democrats don't have the leverage or the appropriate strategy to really block the Republicans as effectively as Republicans blocked Democrats the last 8 years. So it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out. But we know that many innocent Americans are going to get hurt, and some will get sick and die as a result of not having coverage or related matters. Meanwhile, the events yesterday, where the Republican Party, which is so opposed to abortion, had to abort their scheme, pardon my language, to change the ethics watchdog process in the House of Representatives. It's as if they were bringing Tom DeLay and Jack Abramoff back from jail in Abramoff's case and an escaped conviction on the part of the former leader, Tom DeLay. But that was really the attitude that, hey, we've got this, we're in control, and we don't want ethics to bother us. We're certainly not going to oppose them on the president. So, hey, why don't we just fix this? Now, what is interesting is that yesterday I gave most of the emphasis to Donald Trump and his tweet. But after understanding how much of a pushback there was from the general public, I want to amend that and note that there was a lot of pressure from constituents, presumably some Republicans, and the rebels in the House knuckled under to Trump and their leadership, and they did, as I say, abort their effort to change the ethics process. Now, the other thing that was in the works, and I just found out about this today, was that there was also a proposal to let lawmakers resume funding pet projects through the so-called earmarks. And this was also killed in this process. Now, I have to say that I was never as offended by earmarks as many people have been. Yes, it was shady, and there were times when people were jamming things into these, money bills that were squandering money, the bridge to nowhere in Alaska and things like that. But we do need a mechanism where our elected officials can bring money to their district or their state, and it should be done in a transparent way. So I'm not entirely opposed to earmarks, but the way they were managed in the past did invite corruption and the perception of it, and so I think that has to be balanced. In any event, earmarks as we knew them are not currently coming back. So the state of California is gearing up for future legal battles with the Trump administration. The so-called Justice Department, to be run by Jeff Sessions, we'll get to him a little bit later. And so the legislature has reached out and hired an attorney from the Juice law firm in Washington, D.C. called Covington and Burling. And the partner who's going to represent California has a corner office that was reserved for him and kept open while he served as the Attorney General of the United States. And you may be able to tell I'm referring to Eric Holder, who I thought was a lousy Attorney General, but he may be a better partisan counsel in any legal phrase that developed between the Golden State and the guy with the orange hair. Here is a piece in the New York Times today that I find so offensive. It is passing as news, but it's laced with opinion. The headline reads, Trump appears to side with Assange over intelligence agency's conclusions. And this is the extension of an odious comment that Obama made at his last news conference before he jetted off to Hawaii back in December. And he said, well, some people seem to prefer to trust the Russians over our own intelligence agencies. And now we've replaced Russians with Julian Assange, who has been the subject of a lengthy smear campaign engineered by the Obama administration and fueled by Hillary Clinton's anger toward Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. So, as you know, I remain skeptical of the 100% conclusion of our intelligence agencies that Russia was responsible for the leaks or hacks and that this tilted the election toward Trump and that was the goal of the state of Russia. But the New York Times here is obviously embracing the Beltway consensus, the groupthink, and they're trying to shame skeptics by shaming Trump. And this is through the guilt by association that, well, you wouldn't want to side with Julian Assange. After all, he's holed up like a rat in the Ecuadorian embassy in London facing rape charges in Sweden. That's the smear on Assange. Now, that doesn't have diddly to do with whether what he has told us or told Sean Hannity is true about the origin of the DNC leaks and the John Podesta email leaks. So now Trump, who tweeted, Julian Assange said a 14-year-old could have hacked Podesta. Why was DNC so careless? Also said Russians did not give him the info! Now, first of all, I feel so silly, reduced to reading Donald Trump's tweets and passing them off as some kind of informed commentary or policy. But I actually happen to agree with Trump on this, and it makes me very uncomfortable. When I see the New York Times joining this incredible propaganda machine around the Blame Russia meme, it puts me in this awkward spot of agreeing with Donald Trump. And the Times continues to purport that the Obama administration represents that the hackings were two events that came from Russian intelligence and that is 100% certainty. Now, that is simply not true. John Brennan was back on the public television news hour last night, and Judy Woodruff asked him some of the toughest questions I've ever heard come from her, and she did it because she knew he couldn't answer them. She even raised for the first time Craig Murray and Julian Assange and said, hey, Mr. Brennan, these guys say that, they didn't get this information from Russia. And Brennan, who said he couldn't answer the question until the report that the president asked for comes out, and of course it's never going to come out. It's going to be confidentially released to people who will then nod their heads and say, oh, yeah, this proves it. Can we see it? No, of course not. And so that's the dance that Brennan did. And as you can tell, I find this really offensive. And we have people lining up in these bizarre alignments of Democrats with establishment Republicans who, embrace this mythology. And as I've said, when I see proof that Russia was directly responsible, I will admit and change my position. But I haven't seen it, and they keep piling on the same assertions and reconfirming the same bullshit. And the New York Times even cites David Frum, the George W. Bush speechwriter, who says, without Trump's false claims, the WikiLeaks material would have deflated of its own boringness. Well, that just shows rank ignorance, because anybody who has read the emails that were released by WikiLeaks, and I'll just single out one, the Bill Clinton Incorporated memo from Doug Band to John Podesta. It is a disgusting exposure of the corruption of the Clinton family and the Clinton Foundation. And David Frum is permitted to say, oh, they were just boring, and without Trump, nobody would care? That's so offensive. Well, a couple of other things about Trump here in part one. Rex Tillerson is stepping down as the CEO of ExxonMobil. He hopes to be confirmed as Secretary of State. Now, I oppose Rex Tillerson's appointment and confirmation. But Rex Tillerson is actually operating by the book. He's going to get a $180 million payout from ExxonMobil as he severs ties. He was going to retire in March anyway. He's termed out in political parlance. And he's also complying with the standards of the past, where he gets a tax break on the money that he puts into a blind trust. And if he removes the money sooner than 10 years, he would lose the benefit of the tax break in the trust. Now, contrast that with his boss, Donald Trump, who is going to see the opening of a new golf course that bears his name in the Emirates in Dubai. This is the first Arab nation where he has a major installation. And you have to ask, and people are asking, with his name on it, does that mean America has to provide greater security because it could become a target? And what about the conflicts of interest with the governments in these strong, dictatorship countries where you've got to cozy up to them in order to build a golf course. Nobody's asking and nobody's answering those questions except a few voices in the media, and we're going to have a big mess once the Trump problem becomes permanent. And I want to recommend a great article at The Intercept today by David Dayen. He's a California writer, came out of a website called Calitics. And he breaks down the business dealings of Trump's nominee for Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin. And from 2009 to 2015, he headed up a company called One West Bank. And like Donald Trump, he profited from the misery and the misfortunes of people who lost their homes in the mortgage meltdown. And the state of California's Attorney General, who is now our freshman U.S. Senator, Kamala Harris, her office conducted an investigation into the activities of One West Bank in California, and they were prepared to file a civil enforcement action. But Kamala Harris did not approve it, and so that prosecution died. Well, Kamala Harris got $2,000 in a political contribution for her Senate campaign from Steven Mnuchin. That's not a big deal to me, but it may be one reason why she didn't pursue prosecution. And it'll be interesting to see if she ends up being one of the panelists who gets to question Steven Mnuchin as a part of his confirmation hearings, which should be occurring in Washington later this month. I'm linking to the lengthy investigative piece at The Intercept for you to peruse at your convenience. And finally, here in part one today, I want to recommend an op-ed that I found at The Guardian by a person named Lindy West. And I don't know Lindy, but Lindy writes that she has deactivated her Twitter account, and she explains why. She says, for the last 5 years, it's been a machine where I put in unpaid work and tension headaches came out. I write jokes there for free. I post political commentary for free. I answer questions for free. I teach Feminism 101 for free. Off Twitter, these are all things by which I make my living. And she goes on for a few things, but here's the payoff. Trump uses his Twitter account to set hate mobs on private citizens, attempt to silence journalists who write unfavorably about him, lie to the American people, and bulldoze complex diplomatic relationships with other world powers. I quit Twitter because it feels unconscionable to be a part of it, to generate revenue for it, participate in its profoundly broken culture, and lend my name to its legitimacy. Twitter is home to a wealth of fantastic anti-Trump organizing as well, but I'm personally weary of feeling hostage to a platform that has treated me and the people I care about so poorly. I do tweet a little bit, but I don't spend much time on Twitter, and I frankly don't get much out of it. Well, this concludes part one of my two-part daily podcast. You can either just stay right here after Roy Rogers finishes a chorus or two, or you can download part two separately.
To you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then.
Peter B. Collins.
And we roll on with part two of my daily news and comment podcast for Wednesday, January 4th, 2017. And today in part two, I'm going to focus on justice delivered and denied. In Israel, I am shocked and delighted to learn that a court there has returned a conviction, a military court, of the Israeli soldier Sergeant Elor Azaria, who we saw on videotape as he picked up a rifle and went and executed a Palestinian suspect who was lying almost still on the ground, wounded and unarmed. And he executed him at point-blank range. And this led to a massive pandering campaign in the state of Israel, led by people like Benjamin Netanyahu and Avigdor Lieberman. And in that climate, as they pandered to the public hysteria and basically said it didn't matter that he had committed murder because, after all, it was a Palestinian? Well, I am just really surprised that justice can be had in apartheid Israel today. And so I commend the court, and I condemn the individuals like Lieberman and Netanyahu who interfered in this case and who, as I say, pandered to a wrong-headed public opinion, trying to make this right when it was obvious to anyone who saw it how morally repugnant it was. And Lieberman had been pandering, saying that he attended the military court a few months back and said it was theater of the absurd. But the judge, Colonel Maya Heller, went on for 2.5 hours in reading the verdict and systematically, resoundingly rejected all of the main points of the soldiers' defense, said there had been no justification for the shooting, and the sentencing will occur in about a month or so. And the judge gave great weight, we're told, to statements that Azaria made at the scene, where he went up and said, "How is it that my friend was stabbed and the terrorist is still alive?" After he shot the Palestinian, a commander at the scene heard Sergeant Azaria saying, "The terrorist deserved to die." And so this is just another example of how the state of Israel so often operates in a manner that is really just, you cannot justify it in any respect. The diminution of the value of a Palestinian life was clear in the rhetoric that was offered by people like Netanyahu and also by Avigdor Lieberman. So I am pleased to see that justice has occurred for the Palestinian who died, and I'll note that the New York Times article, let me just scan it here again real quickly, never mentions the name of the Palestinian suspect there. He had been accused, I believe, of rock throwing or an attempted stabbing. It does late in the article. It names the victim as a man named Sharif, but it doesn't give us. I guess his first name is in here somewhere, but I can't find it right now. At any rate, this is a surprise and a nice development. Here in the United States, you may have heard about Florida's Stand Your Ground gun law. Basically says that you have the right to defend yourself by shooting first. And this, of course, is a law that came out of the right-wing group called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. And since it was implemented in 2005, Florida has seen a 32% rise in firearm-related homicides and a 25% rise in killings overall in the state. So stand your ground means that somebody is going to die. And often, if the parties are of different races, it is more successful, the stand your ground defense, when invoked by whites against blacks than the other way around. You're not surprised by that, are you? Across the bay from me is the city of Oakland, and I have often referred to its police department as a rogue agency. It has been under the receivership or the control of a federal court for more than 10 years. Scandal after scandal has plagued the department, and last summer, the department had 4 chiefs in something like 14 days. Because a succession of people who were appointed bailed out after problems were developing in their resumes. I'm being kind about that. Well, after a 7-month search, Mayor Libby Schaaf is announcing today that the next Oakland police chief will be a woman who most recently, we're told, led reform efforts at the Chicago Police Department. Her name is Ann Kirkpatrick, and she is also a veteran of a police department in Washington State. So I don't know this woman, and I will not slam her personally. But the department that she's coming out of is perhaps the worst in the nation. Not only does Chicago have this incredible murder rate, this past year was one of the most deadly on record, but the police department is corrupt, and officers have shot and killed people without consequence. Laquan McDonald is one that grabbed people's attention. And at The Intercept today, Jamie Calvin, I've linked to his article, has a great investigative piece on the progress or lack thereof in reforming the Chicago Police Department. And I encourage you to read it because he shows how corrupt cops like Sergeant Ronald Watts framed people on drug cases, and some of those people are still serving time on bogus charges, that the effort to investigate the wrongdoing of Watts and others, including the officer named Burge who was accused of torturing people, all of this is really coming up short. And we know that Mayor Rahm Emanuel has yet to acknowledge the incredible Guantanamo-style detention center called Homan Square on the west side that was exposed by Spencer Ackerman in the Guardian newspaper. And so I encourage you to read this in-depth piece because it shows that things are far from fixed in the Chicago Police Department. And as you may know, I lived in Chicago, worked in radio there, and covered the corrupt police department when I was on radio in Chicago in the 1970s. So this does not come as a surprise to me, but when I think of the lack of progress in cleaning up the Chicago Police Department, and now one of its reform advocates is coming to Oakland, I'm going to have to talk to some of my friends in public office in Oakland about that, and we certainly need to see deeper investigation into this candidate before she is formally hired. I mentioned earlier Jeff Sessions, who is Trump's choice for Attorney General. He's the Neanderthal senator from Alabama, and he was the U.S. attorney there before, and he was denied a federal judgeship, an attempted appointment by Ronald Reagan back in the 80s, because of his record of racist comments. Well, civil rights activists and members of the NAACP started a sit-in at the Mobile office of Jeff Sessions on Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday night they'd been arrested and removed. We're standing in by sitting in a long tradition of civil disobedience in this country, says Cornell Brooks of the NAACP. We need an attorney general who's going to enforce the Voting Rights Act vigorously, unapologetically, and firmly, because there are many politicians in this country who are willing to engage in partisan vote tampering and voter suppression in order to achieve electoral results. Well, you got that right. And so I think that Democrats are making a big target out of Jeff Sessions, and his confirmation hearings will be contentious. But will Democrats have the cojones to deny him the nomination, to keep him out of office? At this point, I'm doubtful. But I'll try to keep an open mind and see what happens. And speaking of Alabama, our friend and colleague and the long-embattled journalist Roger Schuler posted some great news at legalschnauzer.blogspot.com today, and he posted the video trailer for the documentary about the Don Siegelman case that is due to be released this coming summer. It's called Atticus versus the Architect, the political assassination of Don Siegelman. And I want you to hear a little bit of the trailer. I'm linking to Roger's blog so that you can click over there and watch the video yourself. But it's very powerful, beautifully produced, and a lot of great voices comment on the travesty visited on former Governor Don Siegelman and the failure of Barack Obama to pardon or commute his sentence.
They were absolutely targeting Don Siegelman.
They had to get rid of him because they couldn't beat him fair and square.
There's one purpose here, and that was to keep that man from being the governor of the state of Alabama.
That was Richard Scrushy, his co-defendant.
Chapter in a Kafka novel.
He said, our plan is to indict Don Siegelman in the middle of the election. I pick up the paper, Don Siegelman's been indicted. And I thought, holy Moses, are these people for real?
The only evidence they had against Governor Siegelman was the testimony of Nick Bailey. And what Nick Bailey said on that witness stand was a damn lie.
There's something wrong in Alabama.
This is one of the most egregious miscarriages of justice that I've encountered.
The government spared no resources.
He was very popular. He would have won the governorship, so they had to take him out.
It was a closing argument.
So there's more. The trailer runs about 3+ minutes, and I hope you'll watch it. And if you're in a position to contribute and help defray the costs of making the film, that would be wonderful, too. And I have one more bit of good news, but I almost forgot to mention my book deal of the day. Yesterday I told you that I've made a major clean out of my library at home. I have a lot of interesting books, and for my podcast listeners, I'm making a special offer. For $100 or more, if you can afford it, I will offer you one of these signed books that are signed by the author. Yesterday, I brought you Alan Dershowitz with a signed copy of his book, Chutzpah, and so far, nobody has emailed me to claim it, so that is still available if you want to grab it. But today, I have a couple of interesting items. These are two books by the daughter of Ron and Nancy Reagan, Patty Davis. One is called The Way I See It. That's her autobiography. And is it signed? Yep, it's signed to Peter. And then the other book is a novel she wrote called Bondage. And before the interview, I went up the street from the radio station to the porn shop, and I bought some velvet-covered handcuffs. And there is a scene in the Patty Davis novel Bondage where the central figure has sex with handcuffs on. And so I didn't ask Patty to have sex with me, but I asked her if she'd put the handcuffs on. And she politely declined. In the inscription she wrote, "For Peter, don't lose those handcuffs." Signed, Patty Davis. So if you are the first listener to email Peter at peterbcollins.com with a pledge of $100 or more, I will make sure that these books become part of your library, straight out of mine. And we'll see how many people are interested in Patty Davis and her handcuffs. And finally today, the great news that we're hearing from the state of Pennsylvania. A federal judge has ordered the Department of Corrections there to immediately give Mumia Abu-Jamal the latest direct-acting antiviral medications that have a 95% cure rate for the hepatitis C that has laid him low and almost killed him over the last year or two. It's been more than 18 months of constant legal battling, near-death hospitalization, and agonizing chronic sickness. But Noel Hanrahan, the people at Prison Radio, and the many people across the country who support Prison Radio and Mumia have won a victory. And I hope someday I get to announce that Mumia Abu-Jamal has been released from prison in Pennsylvania. Thanks for joining me for part one or part two, or maybe all of the whole damn thing. You can email me your feedback, Peter at peterbcollins.com.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.